Hi again, everybody. It's John and Geoff. As usual, we're really delighted at our new government. I'm being sarcastic. Geoff stays in Aberystwyth. It's quite rural. That's being polite. What I'm going to do, in fact, I'm going to share Google Maps. Sorry, Google. Right, that's Aberystwyth right there. You can see it, just where my mouse cursor is. Right, that's the whole of England and Wales. And frankly, it's got a couple of goat tracks and a small railway line getting into it. And I stay somewhere called Blairgowrie, way the hell up here. Somewhere about there. We're 20 miles from the nearest decent town. At the moment, the farmers are really annoyed. And what they've done is they've gone to middle London to protest. What if they blockade Aberystwyth? Because they are that angry. They are really annoyed at this inheritance tax thing. I can, by the way, sympathise to some extent. But as a small business holder, myself, who's had absolutely no support from the government from the moment we started the company, frankly, they're running a business and if they can't hack it, they can get stuffed. That's pretty harsh. But the day the government gives me something, the way these farmers are getting between 60 and 150 grand a year in subsidy to this day, I might have a little bit of sympathy for them. So the next time you watch Clarkson's Farm, give that a plug, really cool show on Amazon. Just remember Jeremy, who's a multi-millionaire in his own right because of his media career, can actually afford to run that farm without writing checks. It's not quite as clear-cut as people think. That said, some of the changes in inheritance tax and, more importantly, national insurance are catastrophic to a huge number of businesses. It affects me. It'll affect Geoff's job at the university in Aberystwyth. Geoff, have a rant about it. I'm really interested to hear what you've got to say here.
There are just moments where I look at it and you'll find me on some days in rant mode. And then you'll just find me on other days just staring at the screen, just silently, just about comprehending what's going on. We're talking about a government that paid Mauritius to take the Chagos Islands away. We're talking about a government that hit farmers with this inheritance tax and then said it's for the NHS. Even though the NHS is receiving huge amounts of money, and we both have a little bit of experience with the NHS failing to save our loved ones. We're talking about a government that has, with the freebies, they took all those freebies and now they're taxing people. And I happen to know that Keir Starmer may have negotiated a very generous pension for himself once he left Crown prosecution. Really, there's just something very, very tin-eared about this government. I have heard that they just weren't ready to go into power. They were still putting their plans together. Rishi called the election, and they were caught flat-footed. And so it's possible the plans we're seeing are very half-baked. On the other hand, that might mean they didn't have time to polish them enough that they could hide the malevolence within those plans. So we might be seeing a much more honest form of government, due to how quickly this election put them in power. What do you think?
According to the Working Pension Secretary, an additional 50,000 pensioners will go into poverty this year because of the cold winter payment being removed. Source for that is the BBC. Don't hate yourself too hard, mate.
Oh, don't worry, I can take it.
It gets better. Warning. Retail job cuts inevitable after budget. This is from the British Retail Consortium. The cumulative burden of budget changes and other policies already in the pipeline will add billions in costs, etc., of the 3 to 5% gross margin. The people are complaining about this. There's 81 signatories. Ooh. Sorry for the advertising, guys. Aldi, Lidl, Asda, Boots, Curry's PC World, John Lewis, Marks and Spencer's, Primark, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, Tesco. Most of these companies employ between 20 and 150,000 people. I know that Wetherspoons, Britain's largest pub chain, and Marston's, the second biggest one, have also complained to the government about this. Every last one of those businesses is either shutting stores anyway because of the poor retail situation, or is refusing to expand. This is caused by national insurance, which is a tax which is actually, when you earn money in the UK, Britain's a weird place, you pay income tax, that's fine. It's based upon your affordability to pay it. You also pay what's known as national insurance. In America, I think you call it Social Security. So your money's taxed twice. The cool thing from the government standpoint is your Social Security payment, in other words, the national insurance tax that we have, is also paid by business on behalf of its employees. So you're taxed 3 times your income here. What Labour have done is remove a whole bunch of the free part of the tax system for employers and put a 5% rise in. See, I've mentioned before I run a small business. I'm expecting a 10 to 15% price rise on every single thing I buy as a direct result of this idiotic tax rise. And if you go into your supermarket here, I can already see some of the impact. There is a glut of fuel on the global petrol and diesel market. Guess what? Prices are going up here. Why? Because BP, Shell, Esso, Jet, Q8, etc., all the big oil companies are having to put their prices up because they're paying more. So the British Retail Consortium thinks this is a $7 billion a year increase in their costs. What I haven't mentioned is local taxes also going up. We have something called rateable business rates, and that's rateable values calculated in some very obscure system that the government uses, which doesn't appear to bear much relationship to reality. But it means that if you have any premises, whether it's your own home or a business premises of some sort, you have to pay a tax to the local government to pay for services, bins and water and whatever else. I'm not going to go on about how incompetent all these organisations are. We've already done that. I'll just remind you, most of our government officials and organisations in this country are massively overfunded because the people working in it they're in triplicate, a bit like the paperwork. So effectively, the rates have been whacked up, particularly in larger premises. Now, it could be argued if a small business, maybe your local baker or whatever, your local butcher shop, is getting a tax break because that'd be good. Might keep some variety in our high streets. But the damage apparently is spread to them as well with this. I watched a programme the other day and there was a chip shop owner, a lady, and she was going ballistic about it. She's in Southend, you know, the holiday resort just outside of London. She was going absolutely nuts. I'm going nuts because the whole thing's a joke. We're not going to put up tax, says Labour, as it whacks up taxes by 41.7 billion. UK growth is stalled, unemployment is up 300,000, and they're sitting there saying, oh, we've got to try and fix the economy. What economy have we got left because of these idiots? Fortunately, we're not monetised. I probably just got us demonetised again by shouting about this. Interestingly enough, one of the Labour Party's primary donors, the GMB Union, says larger businesses pleading property was utterly pathetic. Allegedly, they're subsidised by the taxpayer. Now, to be fair, in-work benefits, which the Labour Party input in 1997-98 under Gordon Brown, are a taxpayer subsidy on low wages. And that should be removed immediately. Kill it overnight and whack the minimum wage up. Make business pay the right amount of money to people. I don't have a problem with that. But what I do have a problem with is these idiots in the unions defending an intentional attempt to freeze people to death and an intentional attempt to put virtually every business either out of business or reduce its ability to trade profitably. If you've got shareholders, you are legally obliged to trade your business and make a profit. If you don't do it, you go to jail or go bust, or both. Labour seems to have forgotten that every single penny spent by government is generated in the private sector prior to being cycled through the governmental systems. It is wrong, it is obscene for them to give vast, way above inflation pay rises to government sector workers who were already getting paid more in many circumstances than the private sector. And then to hammer the private sector to pay their cronies for this money. It's an outrage. Geoff, I know you work for a uni. I know that's essentially a government job. Did you get a 50 or 30% pay rise in the back of this? That, I presume, means no, right? But I'll tell you what, if you worked in certain areas of government which are heavily unionised with Unison United and the JMB, guess what? You get thumping pay rises, guys. The RMT's another union. It appears that if you want a pay rise in the government and you need a pay rise in the government, you just go and strike a few times and the Labour Party will give you it. Geoff, you guys need to go and strike, mate. Whether you like it or not, get unionised and go out and strike. It's ridiculous. So I've had my rant. Do you think the farmers have a point? Bearing in mind they're paying half the inheritance tax that you and I would. You know, if you, I don't know, we know your mum and dad are in a nice area down south, and that area of Britain's quite expensive. You know, you and your siblings, if you've got some, Geoff, could well be hit with a massive IHT bill. Should a farmer be subsidised by 50%?
Well, the problem is that farmers aren't making a huge amount of money. Remember that supermarkets do not want to pay them that much. We've got to keep food cheap. And there are a lot of farmers that are just above the breadline. There's a reason why some of them get huge subsidies. Really, if you look at what happened in New Zealand when they privatised farming and they got rid of subsidies, it's doing quite well now. But it was a very, very painful period. I would... How much money does inheritance tax bring in for Britain each year? No, each decade. Let's think cumulatively here. How much inheritance tax is brought in for the Treasury every 10 years for the whole of Great Britain?
It will raise approximately 7.5 billion in this tax year.
70 billion. Okay.
No, about 70 billion over the piece. A bit more than that. Might want to look at it in another way, guys. It pays for Trident two times over. All right. It pays for a pretty big chunk, about 5 to 10% of the NHS.
There's too much waste in the NHS. There's you know what? We have 3.5 million civil servants on the payroll. So if you can identify cuts which will produce within 10 years an 80 billion effect, then you scrap inheritance tax because people hate it. It can distort certain things. It can lead to all sort of ludicrous trickery by people to get around it. I'm sure you could improve the economy of this country by getting rid of it. And then you can cut subsidies to farmers.
Yep, I mean, to be honest with you, I think there's several problems with it. It's a tax on money that's already been taxed for the most part.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind that our national insurance is a tax and a tax and a tax, effectively. Corporation tax is really not worth gathering in overall. I think it brings in 15 or 20 billion in total, but the cost of gathering it is not far off of that. the big money earners for the government are national insurance, personal taxation, and value added tax, sales tax for those of you who live in America and Canada. So our sales tax is 20%. So 1/6 of everything you buy that qualifies is taxed at that level. It's a very strange system, and we're VAT registered as a business. So a lot of what I do is I pay Geoff. Geoff pays the Chancellor, then I claim it back from the Chancellor. So I'm revenue neutral. The Chancellor, so there should be, as it were, a gimme for a business buying from a business. That should be taken out the numbers if everyone's VAT registered. It's a farcical system. It's just jobs for the boys. The other thing that you need to be aware of is that if someone is paid for by government of any type in the UK, essentially that's all from tax. So why are we taxing them and employing the staff to do the maths to take that tax just to put it back into the pot? It's weird. So if you get someone on 50k a year and they pay 20 grand in tax, why not pay them the 30,000 quid they take home anyway and fire a lot of the tax people? Free them up, put them into the economy, make them productive. Because an awful lot of what happens in government is not productive. So if you want some savings, there are ways to do it. Getting 7.5 billion, 7.5 billion a year, just get rid of it. Seriously, just get rid of it. Because it's an obnoxious tax. And my mum's estate's almost certainly not going to be big enough to get taxed, thank God. But it could have been. And we looked at amelioration, and when we found out that we weren't going to be there, we didn't need to do it. But most people have to put stuff in trust. They have to hide money legally. It's not tax evasion, which is illegal, tax avoidance schemes, so that their families don't end up on the street or bankrupted by the way IHT works. Now, I do have sympathy for the farmers on the grounds that it's millions that big farms are worth. And the Labour Party's numbers clearly don't add up. Clearly, the farmers' union numbers do actually make a lot more sense to me, given the price of land in the UK. But I'm back to, they're running a business. If they can't make it profitable, it should not be propped up, because we do not prop up other key parts of our economy. The government lets it go to the wall. That all said, there is one strategic reason to bribe the farmers to keep going, and that's food security. Now, the US, Canada, actually have food surpluses overall. The people there can live without imports. They choose not to live without imports. They want the imports from all over the world so they have a more varied diet. In Britain, we import anything up to 80% of what we eat. And we always have done after the Industrial Revolution kicked off. We've brought in livestock and chilled meats from all over the world to feed our people. You'd be surprised at how much meat that you buy in the UK that's British is in fact imported. Whether it's New Zealand lamb, Argentine and Brazilian beef, American beef, Uruguayan beef, pork from Denmark and from Holland. The amount of imports is incredibly high here. We're a wealthy country. We do not need to take away people's right to being warm. We do not need to take away businesses' ability to employ people. And we certainly do not need to take away a farmer's requirement to grow food. What we should be doing, though, with farmers is saying to them, right, okay, you need to put in money into a scheme, and that gets you round the IHT by the government. So instead of giving 100 grand a year to subsidy, you're only getting 30, because that's what you live off. We'll give you the average salary. In Britain, the average salary is 29,995. I don't earn it, I earn less. Running a business is expensive. So, that's my thoughts on it. Ukraine. Should the British and Americans have given the Ukrainians permission to use ultra-long-range weapons into Russian territory? Hey, change the topic, why don't I?
I mean, I think they should have done. If they were going to do it, they should have done it earlier. I mean, this is the thing that's been annoying me about this entire war. We keep crossing lines, but we cross them so slowly. Somewhere along the line, someone should have sat down and gone, "Well, we've crossed this line, we've crossed this line, we've crossed this line. If we're going to cross further lines, cross them right now, as in 2 years ago." However, we've decided to cross a line now. Okay, fine. Probably too little, too late, and I'm not sure it will provoke that much of a response from Russia simply because Russia is currently winning. Why bother to nuke the entire world if you're winning? That would be ridiculous.
Yeah, pretty pointless. Yeah. What I find interesting, I've got to be honest, I was not fully aware that when the West gave the Ukrainians MRS, that we essentially hobbled the damn missiles through targeting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Software.
Absolutely.
I actually didn't realise. I just assumed the Ukrainians are too damn stupid to use them.
No. They have been screaming at the Americans to allow them to do this sort of thing for practically since the war began. There's a huge amount of stuff where America and, I'm sorry, the European Union, especially Germany, have said to the Ukrainians, sorry, just bear with me, don't use this, don't use that, don't use this in this way. The Ukrainians are fighting for their lives, and eventually desperation wins out over stupidity. And ultimately, frankly, Germany has a lot to answer for in terms of don't wake the Russian bear. Because the Russians are still going to be mad at us, for goodness sake. Why bother?
I think the German sensitivity is that they've won one, lost one, haven't they? Against the Russians.
Point. Yeah.
But against us, they've lost two.
Yeah.
Something, by the way, a few times I've met people socially from Germany, and they're always quite up themselves about football, because West Germany and Germany beforehand, and then the German Republic as it is now, won the World Cup 4 times. And they automatically assume that every Scot supports England, and once you correct that, they make a great big fuss out of the fact that Scotland has never progressed beyond the group stages in a soccer tournament. And I just sit there and go 2-0. And they're totally baffled. Till I tell them, Geoff has got it. 2 world wars to nil, mate. Don't fight us, yeah? Football's just a pastime to us. To them, it's a religion. All rather nasty joking aside, there is something here, though. If you sell something at full capability and hobble it, you've actually created a situation where the other side aren't getting value for money. Now, the interesting point I've got to make here is Ukraine financially has not been able to afford to buy a single weapon from the West. All the weapons have been bought using cash soft loans. All of them. There are no donations from what I understand. I've done some digging. Essentially, this is what America did to Britain, and Britain did to Spain, nationalist Spain, and what pretty much all the democracies have always done to people that they're not too keen on, but not that upset at. Much stuff, that's great, can't afford it here, have a loan, that's the interest rate, pays it back. Oh, and by the way, that's the price for the kit that you want to use. But I've never once come across this idea that someone can pay $100 million for a bunch of rocket launcher systems and then just be told, sorry, you can't use them. What? Why buy them then? There's nothing wrong for the Ukrainians to use their old Russian or Soviet-made stuff. Now, I know they've been doing that from the get-go. However, to then give them a much more capable system, say, oh, you can't use that, it's pointless. I actually think it's pretty pointless giving them the high-end tanks and armored personnel carriers and jet fighters that we've been starting to sell them, because they clearly don't know what they're doing with them. That's not to say, I mean, they're saying, oh, Ukrainian drones are why the Russians aren't advancing fast. What drones? Some with a TV camera when there's no artillery to back it up. It's not the problem. The problem is the Russians have decided basically to teach the Ukrainians yet another very brutal lesson. They did it in the 1930s, guys. They did it just after the Second World War. I suspect of doing it again. That doesn't, by the way, excuse it, and it doesn't make for good listening. It's bloody terrifying. You know, the collectivization of Ukraine in the 1930s killed up to 15 million people, depending who you believe, through a man-made famine. You know, after the war, Ukraine had been kind of independent under the Nazis, and kind of occupied, by the way, and, you know, they weren't too keen on being reoccupied by the Soviets, and there was quite a lot of people went out into the boondocks and fought. And the Soviets took a pretty dim view of that. In fact, Vatutin, one of the tank army commanders, was killed by Ukrainian partisans. So we're not talking about any love being lost between Great Russia and Ukraine. You know, it's a historic enmity now. And yet, one should never forget this, Kiev was at one point the capital of all the Russias. It wasn't that big a Russian empire at the time, but it was important. So, you think the Russians are going to win, do you, Geoff?
Well, the problem is we all thought the Ukrainians had passed that law and got they'd scraped enough young men to keep it going. And that's the thing is, without that, it turns out that hasn't happened. So the collapse that's been predicted to happen 6 months ago could happen around January.
Right.
Probably not earlier than that, because the Ukrainians have somehow been apparently, yes, I know drones are not what they're cracked up to be, but if you attach an explosive to a drone and manufacture a whole load of them and slam them into Russian positions when they haven't got a 50 cal pointed in the right direction, it's kind of making up for the artillery shortfall just about. But that's buying them time. A month, month and a half. Eventually, it's going to collapse.
I'm going to keep coming back to Corey saying, fill the sky black with shells. Cover the sky with bombers to make it even blacker, and cover the ground with tanks and armored personnel carriers. That's what the American way of fighting war really is. And the best drones on the planet are the American Predator ones, but they're not. There's not a huge number of them. They're not massively capable, you know, in terms of affecting a modern battlefield. And by modern, I mean NATO Warsaw Pact style massed armor potential conflict. They're really for, being honest with you, bush war interventions and spying and that kind of thing. But used properly with sufficient long-range weapon systems that can react fairly quickly to live or almost live intelligence data coming in from, you know, this fuel dump, that ammunition dump, these units massing there for an attack. The drones should be really effective at directing artillery fire. And these big long-range rockets, the MLRSs and so on, you know, they've got a range of anything up to 300 kilometers, depending what system it is you're looking at. They're enormously capable. They're designed to take a whole grid square off a map. You know, they should have been getting used from the get-go. The issue, of course, is whether or not NATO would be prepared to give/sell the Ukrainians sufficient ammunition for these weapon systems to make them viable. And the other thing is, there is absolutely nothing wrong with Soviet area firefinder radars. They work just fine. The Israelis have found that out. We found that out. You know, the Americans have everyone's found that out. There's nothing wrong with them. And the Russians have a whole shitload of towed artillery. They can just hide in a wood somewhere for counter battery fire and wait for the inbound rockets and try and take out the launchers. You know, so the actual effective range might be quite a bit less because I suspect the Ukrainians would want to launch them some considerable distance off the front line, solely to give the vehicles time to shoot and scoot before incoming heavy artillery starts taking them out, because they're not heavily armored vehicles, as I recall. I could be wrong, but they're not. It's not like an M1 Abrams or a Leopard or a Challenger. They're not designed for that kind of environment. I can check in that, by the way, if people are interested and get a wee bit more information about it and put it out in the next video. But that's one of the things. I also find very interesting the fact that neither side's air forces are doing a whole hell of a lot, but we keep coming back to that. The drones are meant to replace the air forces, and yet nobody has air superiority. No one seems to have drone superiority, to my eyes. The other thing, by the way, I did some digging, actually for Last Malvinas, the game that we're talking about in the last video, into the AGM-84 Harpoon. And guess what? The Americans sold them land-based Harpoon missiles, and it's entirely possible that some of the Russian shipping losses are as a result of the use of them. So all this crap about the Ukrainians developing their own sea-skimming missile appears to be bunkum. They bought Harpoon.
Well, keep in mind, Harpoon had its problems hitting ships at times. I know the Americans did work to improve it, but when it comes to shipping losses, remember that the Russians, they never fought the Falklands War, they never fought the First Gulf War. They have no experience hitting small ships with modern weaponry. They have no experience dealing with incoming missiles into their ships. I'm perfectly prepared to accept the possibility, no matter how useless those Neptune missiles were, they could slam into a couple of ships here and there, and the Russians were not able to counteract them. When you look at the way that we had with Sheffield, apparently most of the doors for flash protection and damage control were open. We had the ComSat Scots array on, and we didn't know that an XSET was inbound, and that had a horrible amount of damage to Sheffield. But the XSET does not explode. It literally just span around inside, spitting fuel all over the place. If a Neptune did that to a Russian destroyer or ammunition ship or whatever, that's still going to cause a huge amount of problems. The Russians fundamentally still have a 1980s Navy. You're starting to get stuff like, is it the Gorshkov class frigate? I probably got that wrong. They're starting to get some modern corvettes and frigates in, but it's a very slow modernization. They have not done the sort of modernization that the Western powers have done with our navies. So I'm still on the fence with that one. I can see it being a mixture of Harpoon and any indigenous homemade missiles. I would absolutely be prepared to say that the Russians are still just about useless enough that can have an effect, though I think that'll change over time. Because if there's one thing the Russians can do, they take losses, they learn. That's the Russian way.
But yeah, I mean the Russian problem, I think, is that with the shortage of money after the fall of the Soviet Union, they're a large and not necessarily world-class fleet with some world-class weapon systems built into it. But they're manpower intensive, they're expensive to run, as I understand it, and they're not as integrated digitally as US ships or British ships from the 70s onwards, which means that unless the crew's well trained and well drilled, which means a lot of time at sea, working out how to do it, effectively, the combat effectiveness of the Russian Navy is almost certainly not particularly good. That's not to say it's terrible. They should be doing better than they are. And the other issue you've got, if you've got 1970s and 80s technology and you've got old missiles and you haven't thought that maybe we should check the launch motor and so on for cracks, and you pull the trigger and the thing blows up in the tube. That happens to every military, by the way. I could tell you a story or two about Corey having prematures with his artillery battalion when he was still in the US Army. because he was firing ammunition from World War II. And sometimes it didn't go well. Usually it was all right. The odd shell, it wasn't good.
I know
So
of an individual on a Type 23, and they were launching whatever it was from the mushroom farm, the Aster 15, I think, or Sea Scepter, and the mushroom farm missile cell it's a bit fair distance from the bridge, but it's still on the bow, and the thing went up, and right next to the window it detonated. Everyone was fine and nothing was damaged apparently, but civil servant on the bridge monitoring a missile test, and boom, it happens to everyone, including us, and that was only a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, basically shit happens. I know that any weapon system can have a failure. One day I'd love to get Corey on this and get him talking about one. I'm not going to steal his thunder, because you need him to tell the story about the time when the Inspector General was looking at his unit and someone wouldn't listen, and they almost ended up singing castrato. So, we've got that. We've got the ongoing fiasco with Israel in the Middle East. They seem to have given up targeting military targets and are targeting civilians pretty much constantly, from what I can see. I'm aware now that armed Palestinian gangs are running about trying to hijack aid going in because there's no food. There's no medicines getting in, or very little. So, law and order seems to be breaking down in Gaza. That is just an excuse, unfortunately, for the Israelis to be even harsher, I suspect. The crossing into the Lebanese southern territory seems to be an ongoing thing. It's a disaster for the world. And what's fascinating is more and more countries are starting to get very uncomfortable with full support for Israel. Britain, Germany, the French, various other countries are actually starting to question whether or not we should be giving these people unlimited number of weapons without a pause being put on the fiasco on the Gaza Strip. It's far beyond time. We just said, sorry, we're not selling you stuff. Because I don't think this is a legitimate war now. I don't think it was to begin with. I believe it should have been done by the police, which is what the British did in Northern Ireland. Yes, the army were there, but you couldn't be arrested by them. You could be detained and handed over to the police. But you couldn't be arrested and put through due process. The Israelis aren't even trying to do that. And you can argue about whether or not Hamas are right. We all know Hamas's behaviour is reprehensible, but two wrongs do not make a right. And when Netanyahu's defence minister and so on and so forth are quitting, senior generals are giving up the ghost as well. You've got to start thinking, why are these people who are very much part of the Israeli security apparatus saying enough's enough? Some are saying it to try and get any hostages out. Hate to tell you guys, I suspect most of the hostages are dead. Probably as the direct result of Israeli action. They do seem to know where Hamas's bases tend to be, and they tend to be very aggressive about taking them out, but guess where the hostages probably are? I don't think they thought that through. But I don't have their intel. And, what they're doing just doesn't make sense. It's almost as if they've taken a certain decision, which we don't want to go into here, because technically in Britain we're not allowed to think these thoughts for fear of being anti-Semitic. This isn't anti-Semitism. I have Jewish friends, and I haven't spoken to too many of them since this kicked off. It's something I might do in the next few weeks to find out how they feel about it. But I do know that most of them just wanted peace for any friends or family who lived in Israel. And a war is not what they wanted. And unfortunately, that's what they've got. And I said at the get-go, this is Stalingrad. And it's turning out for that. The Israelis have not got a clear-cut victory anywhere. They can say whatever they want, but they're still there. They're still they're back in Rafah for what, the 6th time now? Because they've gone back to Rafah this week. You know, it reminds me a bit of operations in Stalingrad, where the Germans would be up there, the Russians would be here, the Germans underneath, and then Russians beneath that. Then it'd swap over. No one could actually keep the place. It's a fiasco. It's a bloodbath, and it needs to stop now. Just my view. It's all pretty sad, actually. And we're coming up for the season of goodwill. Anyone feeling any goodwill about here? You know? Wait, what are you after for Christmas, Geoff?
Oh, crikey. Huh.
Call them out.
A nice, I don't know, a nice big fat check from the university. That's what I like.
I want a winning lottery ticket. Anyone got one they'd want to give me? A couple of gold bars would be good.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I'd like for Christmas. I'd like to get somebody to come in and invest in our software project. We are very close to full 64-bit code right across the editing tools that we have. That puts us incredibly close. Now, we are going to try and do a video with Bob later in the week, because I want Bob to tell you all about what he's done. I don't want to steal his thunder, because what he's done is amazing. But it means we can get everything 64-bit. All the tough stuff's been done. It's just fixes. So when we are looking at that, with a bit of funding, some investment in that business, we are between 3 months and a year and a bit from being able to release an all singing, all dancing conflict sim that would work pretty much anywhere on the planet. If you're interested in that, email us, info@tkc-games.com. I'll get Andrew to put it in the description below. We're deadly serious. We've done a huge amount of work. It's one of the reasons a lot of other things have been slow, actually, is Bob and I have had to spend a huge amount of time fanning about with all kinds of stuff. The primary bits of what he's been doing actually work. We're adding functionality now. I'll let him talk about that because it's really cool. Geoff and I have been working on Last Will Venus. As you can see behind us, the eagle and the bear. That's his front World War I. That's going to pre-order sometime by the new year. Why? Because Armistice and Home by Christmas are actually pretty damn close to going into artwork. So Geoff and I are going to talk about that next time round, not this time. And for that, I'm going to try and change my thing so it looks like Last Will Venus, because by that point I should be ready for artwork, hopefully. We're really close on a whole pile of stuff. And it's exciting, but it's soul destroying doing it on a shoestring. We need people to buy in to make this easier for everybody concerned, to make it quicker. We hugely appreciate the support. We love it when people say in the links or email us, look, I can help with that or I can do that. It makes life that bit easier for everybody concerned. But the reality of it is, the price is up between 200 and 400%, with another 7 or 8% going to come up. We really do need to look at the business. We do need to get investment in it. We need to drive it forward in a slightly different way. That's why we're doing almost all the updates now on YouTube, because we want to build a following here. We're maintaining our following on Facebook. In fact, it's growing, and thank you all if you're watching this through Facebook. Because I know we've gone from just about 3,000 followers to well over 3,200 followers. Partly as a result of all the stuff we've done about some of the board game stuff, but also Geoff and I talking. It's incredibly exciting for us. We really appreciate all of that support. I can't thank you all enough. Hopefully I'll get rid of this cold. Hopefully Geoff won't get it. And I think it's time for us both to say goodnight. He's just been a pain in the arse. I'm pretty sure this bugger's been in the orange juice, guys. Right, so Have yourselves a brilliant evening. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.